Over in Japan, strong aftershocks continue to rattle Kumamoto Prefecture as rescuers confront harsh weather conditions in a race to rescue dozens of people believed still trapped or buried under collapsed buildings. At least 41 people have died, 11 are reported missing. Feared landslides are trapped underneath the rubble, and more than 800 have been injured since Thursday as a result of the strongest tremors. A magnitude 6.5 quake last Thursday, seen as a foreshock to the 7.3 tremor early Saturday. Collapsed buildings and bridges triggered fires and landslides, and even a bullet train. Both quakes were at shallow depths on shore and located under populated areas. Three major earthquakes struck two countries, two in Japan, one in Ecuador. The events happened within a span of 4 days. Questions if the earthquakes are related. The devastating blow of these earthquakes caused great agony and anguish due to the loss of lives and properties. Both countries are located within the Ring of Fire, where 90% of all earthquakes strike, according to the National Geographic Society. Tonight, we are joined by FIVOC to give us an insight on the recent events in Japan and Ecuador. Good evening, sir, and welcome to NewsLife.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us today. Now, we're very happy that you could actually spend some time with us here and shed some light, given that the span of the three earthquakes that have happened in the last couple of been quite recent. It's been 4 days apart, and they've hit Japan and finally Ecuador. Now, people are asking if these three earthquakes are related to each other and what perhaps could have triggered them.
Well, if we look at the two earthquake events in Japan, these are the same area. And one is considered the foreshock, or the earthquake before the bigger one, which is called the main shock. And these two earthquake events are related in a sense that these would occur along the same fault trace that cuts across the Kyushu Island. So essentially, the idea is that if one moves, it can trigger the movement of another segment of the fault. But the Japan earthquakes would not be related at all to the Ecuador earthquake. Ecuador is a country to the east of the Pacific Ocean, while Japan is on the west. This would be too far away. Second, the mechanism of the earthquakes are very different. The Japan earthquakes were triggered by faults that moved horizontally, while the earthquake in Ecuador was triggered by an earthquake that was due to a fault that moved vertically. So those two are different. Although these three earthquake events are found in countries belonging to the Pacific Ring of Fire, these are not directly related at all.
I see. And sir, how often does a 7.8 magnitude earthquake occur around the world?
Well, earthquakes between magnitude 7 to 7.9 would be roughly 15 earthquakes per year. A magnitude 8 earthquake would be, or greater, roughly 1 earthquake per year. Magnitude 9 earthquake events would be quite seldom and would not be very common. But those below magnitude 7 will be quite a lot, and these would be ordinary earthquakes in most countries around the Pacific Ring of Fire.
That's right. Now, and sir, if memory serves, the last big earthquake here in the Philippines in Bohol, and if you would track the earthquakes happening around the country, how often does an earthquake with a magnitude 6.5 and above happen within the Philippines?
Well, essentially would be around 5 or less. 7 would not be every year. Occasionally, though, there would be magnitude 7 earthquake events successively for 2 years, or maybe magnitude 7 earthquakes, depending on the location, 3 times in a year. So if we look at the 400-year record of our written history for earthquake events, we have suffered 90 destructive earthquakes already in the past 400 years. So roughly 1 strong earthquake event every 5 years. And that is quite a high number in terms of large earthquakes visiting a country. What we need to really understand, though, is that compare earthquake events and find a cycle of events for the whole country or across the globe. What we need to do is focus on all the faults, and per fault, find out the cycle of movement of its fault. And typically, this would be hundreds of years. For example, the Valley Fault System, which is eastern side of Metro Manila would move every 400 to 600 years. And in Bohol, you might have noticed that old churches got destroyed because in the past 400 years that these churches stood up, these were not affected by a strong earthquake. These were affected in 2013. And so, in essence, we can say large earthquake events from its fault would happen every 400 to 600 years, sometimes to 1,000 years. So, it's just coincidental that when the fault has stored so much energy, sometimes it releases the energy to generate large earthquakes. Although these are not related, it just so happened that these are simultaneously or one after the other.
Right, and it's a shame that it's destroyed so much culture and heritage sites as well. Now, sir, last year especially, there have been massive efforts to prepare for, the supposed big one, earthquake drills and lots of preparations around the country. Now, hopefully, this does not happen in our lifetime. What lessons should we learn from the past and perhaps experiences from the other countries that have experienced tremendous disasters to make sure that lives are saved?
Well, one of the most important things that we all need to understand is that to really prepare for a large earthquake, we need to know the scenario that can happen even before the earthquake would occur. And that is what I call disaster imagination. So for every fault that we have to estimate the magnitude and the impact that it might cause. The West Valley Fault, part of the Valley Fault system, was really advertised as a major source of earthquake for Metro Manila, and the media called it the big one. But that scenario is only for Metro Manila. We have other faults all around the country where we have different scenarios, and the magnitude can be bigger than those in Metro Manila. So we have to prepare all of these scenarios so that we can match the preparedness to the possible impact of an earthquake. And for what can happen in a city is like what happened recently in Japan, in Kumamoto City. The fault traverses the city, which is very similar to Metro Manila, and the fault moved sideways as well. So the key is, if you notice, even though it's magnitude 7.3, the number of people that have been killed is much less than compared to many other countries. In the country of Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, 230,000 people died for a magnitude 7 earthquake, but in this case in Japan, only more than 40 plus for a magnitude 7.3 earthquake. So we would note that making sure that houses and buildings are constructed properly and making sure that people know how to respond to earthquake and after would be very vital in reducing the number of casualties.
Right. Now, sir, just to ask about what exactly is happening as well in our country. I mean, there have been 3 earthquakes in the past 7 days. There's been 13 quakes in the past month. And if you would look at the statistics of last year, almost 400 in the past year. What is going on, perhaps, on a scientific level?
If we look at the country and consider our country as a big piece of rock, and you know that the Philippines is bounded by blocks of rocks underneath the different seas and oceans, please note that the archipelago is bounded by the Philippine Sea to the east and the West Philippine Sea to the west. And these blocks of rocks under these seas are actually colliding with the Philippine archipelago and diving beneath it. So if we have this big piece of rock and we use our hands to show the forces colliding into the Philippines, so as a result of the collision, there will be cracks that are formed because of the stresses. Rocks would have different strengths or weaknesses, and cracks would form, and if the rocks along those cracks would move, those are what we call the active faults. And as the plates or blocks of rocks dive beneath the Philippine archipelago offshore, earthquakes are triggered as well. That is why every day we record at least 20 earthquakes. Our instruments called seismographs would record it. That would mean that these faults move constantly. Not in a big manner though, but just moderate to remind us that there are many small events, but it can happen that there can be large events. So these are normal events. That's not a good information to use as basis for saying that there can be big earthquakes soon. We don't have a pattern. From January to the present, the same number of earthquake events have been recorded. It's very flat. So what we need to remind our although at this point we cannot predict when a strong earthquake would happen, we can determine how strong an earthquake is from a particular fault and how this will affect a particular city or region. Then we can prepare for it accordingly. We need to be ready all the time.
That's right. Disaster imagination, right?
Yes.
That's the key. All right. Now, final words for our viewers today, and perhaps tips to be able to help them to gain more awareness on what to do in case a major earthquake strikes?
First, every people should know if their areas are to be affected by certain earthquake hazards. For example, is there an active fault near the area? House on top of it or not? We should not place buildings on top of the active fault. Second, how strong the ground shaking will be if the fault will move. Will the ground be behaving like a quicksand? Will the ground liquefy during the shaking? So otherwise, the bridges, the roads can be affected. If we are on a steep slope, would earthquakes trigger landslide events? And of course, we always need to watch out for possible fire. Are we along the coastline? There can be a tsunami after a major earthquake. So we need to know what hazards will affect us. Then, make sure that our houses and buildings are constructed properly. We have not decided, don't have a house yet, and if we want to construct one, follow the building code. Make sure that things inside will not collapse on you. So these should be anchored on the wall or on the floor, or those in the ceilings should be tied properly. And then, do the drop, cover, and hold during the earthquake. Select the places where you will hide. Event. Determine areas outside of the house or building to be used as an evacuation area. The distance of the evacuation area, which is an open area, should be 1.5 times the height of the tallest building, such that when the building tilts, then they will not be affected.
Right.
There are many things that can be done, and these are very simple. Evacuation, construction, personal response, and community response to the earthquake will be very important.
All right, that's a lot of useful information tonight. Thank you very much, Director Renato Solidum, Director of the Philippine Institute of Volcanology. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it.